Hi there, and welcome back to this narration series where I narrate a teen wolf fan fiction that I wrote. If you enjoy this kind of videos, perhaps you could leave a like, and if you do enjoy my content, perhaps you can subscribe. I would really appreciate it. In the 10 previous chapters, we've already established that Scott and his pack were in LA. They left Beacon Hills when they went after Monroe. Now, during a mission where they were supposed to rescue a group of supernaturals, they'd found out, thanks to Alec, that Monroe was heading back towards Beacon Hills. And so they made the decision to go back to Beacon Hills. Meanwhile, back in town, a few things had changed, but other things hadn't, since the story takes place around 3 years after the Anuk-ite storyline. Melissa McCall remains a nurse. However, what changed in the hospital is that they made a special division or a dedicated floor to cater to supernatural creatures that were admitted. And they were to be admitted through the back doors and to be kept separated from normal humans in order to avoid any unwanted scenes or situations. A specific number of doctors and nurses were tasked with caring for supernaturals that were admitted. Everything is going smoothly until Chris Argent brings in a woman that he says to be a human and informs Melissa that a group of hunters had been attacked in the woods and that a potentially new supernatural threat was roaming around. At the scene where this group of people and where the woman was discovered by Chris, Sheriff Stilinski was leading the investigation with the help of Nolan, who was with Chris at the time of the discovery. On another side of town and at the clinic, Deaton was kept in the loop by Mason and Corey, who brought him pictures of the scene and the people that were attacked by this new creature. That was when Peter Hale came into the clinic carrying an unconscious Theo, and he informs them that they were attacked by an unknown supernatural creature that wasn't much of a werewolf or anything he knew of. He could not see much of it because of the darkness, and even him as a supernatural man couldn't do much to outrun them, catch them, nothing. Parrish was on patrol with his new partner, and he had an odd encounter with a new creature, but it did not seem like a threat. It seemed like somebody was trying to make contact with him, although he failed at getting a look at it or keeping the contact with the creature. On the way back to town on the bus, Lydia gets a vision in which she encounters a new banshee that she didn't know beforehand, and that banshee lets her know that upon arrival they need to visit the basement where the Dread Doctors kept their chimeras, that same basement where Parrish was attacked before by Belasco. Unfortunately, the pack doesn't get to make it safely into town because as soon as they crossed the welcome sign, a creature stepped in their way and caused a massive crash. And it turned out that creature wasn't alone, and for the first time that night, they got to see the creature that caused their accident. And since they were taken by surprise, the pack were pretty easily bested by the creatures. Thanks to the intervention of Braden, they were safe and out of danger. But upon arrival, she gets confused. She wonders where Parrish is, and they all get confused as to why she expected Parrish to be there. And that is it for the summary. You may now enjoy the video. Chapter 12. Guardian Angel. If we die out here, I swear to God, I'll kill you, promised the young man to his partner as he walked behind him. Talk about beating the dead horse. A second voice had risen in the dead of night. Just remind me why we're doing this again. I mean, for all we know, it could just be a trap and we are walking right into an ambush. This time, he formulated a question instead of a threat. He did have legitimate reasons to show and express concern. Walking in the woods at night when it was freezing cold, under a full moon to top that, wasn't exactly the wisest nor the safest thing to do, although the previous arguments were enough to explain why it was not a recommended activity. It was not the main one yet. It is not an ambush. How do you know? We have no idea who this guardian angel is. Aren't you the least bit concerned about this, or am I just being unreasonable? Indeed, the main reason he was so worried was the guardian angel, who neither of them really knew of. You're being perfectly reasonable. Of course, I am concerned about it, but I am more concerned about what could happen if we don't do this. That response did well to calm the nerves of his partner. Were they doing the right thing? Should they have come there like they were instructed to? Were they going to live past that night? All those questions kept wrestling round and round in their heads, but whatever the outcome, they were already there. Well, here we are. Now what? We're exactly at the coordinates we were given, so now we take a deep breath, listen, and wait for whatever is supposed to happen. And so they stood there, quiet, listening closely to the forest's melody, the hoots of owls, the sound of trees and branches swaying along with the wind and its whims. You know what annoys me the most in all of this? He took a moment and spoke again. We're missing our anniversary, yet again. His partner blessed him with a genuine smile, then said, I was sure you'd say that at some point tonight. I guess you just know me too well. Their smiles dropped when they heard a faint growl in the distance. Their ears caught that same growl a second time, and they realized it wasn't as distant as they first thought. It was just very low. Definitely not hunters. Werewolves? I am not catching any scent. Well, I am. I sensed it before. In Beacon Hills. So, what is it? Don't know, but it's definitely not a werewolf. They had been whisper-talking every word to each other from the moment they figured out they weren't alone, focusing their senses on gathering more information about their company, preparing their muscles to react in order to dodge or fight back against any incoming attacks. And lucky they did. Right in time to jump back as something shot fast towards them. It landed in the ground between them. After inspection, they realized it was an odd-looking knife. One of the young men reached out and pulled it out. Both of them were taken aback as they saw that a large part of it, in fact most of it, dug itself deep in the ground. Up close, it resembled more of an abnormally big canine tooth than a knife. They looked at each other, wondering how strong was whatever threw it their way. That low growl came quick to answer. Their heads simultaneously shot up in the same direction. No way, in the 7 L's. Their eyes widened at that sight. The sheer size of that thing was intimidating. It looked human enough underneath that armor of bones it wore. A berserker? Here? Really? Can we fight this thing? One of them. Maybe. But 2? What do you mean by 2? Well, I mean that other one. He pointed behind his partner towards the second berserker standing there. How are we supposed to get rid of them now? We stick together and we run. They started stepping back slowly as the two creatures began to step forward. A very loud growl resonated in the area, stopping all of them in place. Wow. Oof. Looks like I got here just in time. A young woman spoke as she came closer, emerging from behind the nearest trees. The two men looked at her and shifted attention to the berserkers, who were standing still. What's happening? Why did they stop? Because I told them to, I guess, she replied. You're a were-jaguar? That's a long story for another time. For now, I guess you're the two werewolves I am supposed to meet. Jackson Whitmore and Ethan Stainer. Yeah, does that mean you're not the guardian angel? Asked Ethan. No, I am Hayden. Hayden Ramiro. Hayden? Wait, I heard that name before. Aren't you one of Scott's betas? This time it was Jackson's turn to ask her the question. It threw Ethan off because he thought she was a were-jaguar. Wait, so you're a werewolf, but then how can you control these? He pointed to the berserkers as he spoke. I told you, long story, and right now we need to get going. We can't afford to be late. I'll tell you everything I know on the way. On the way where? Chimed in Jackson. We're going to Mexico, to La Iglesia, she said bluntly. Chapter 13. Key code, Lydia. Scott held Braden's phone up. He seemed attentive to the words printed on the screen. His eyes followed from left to right, then from top to bottom, as he was reading the content of a message before handing it back to its owner, who was standing in front of him. So, you were sent the coordinates of our location? He asked. Exactly, she confirmed. But you came prepared, like you already knew what to do out there. The young man had so many questions, he struggles to know which one to ask first. Curious and confused, he continued. Why did you ask about Parrish? I was under the impression that he'd be there before me. I was only supposed to show up as backup, she answered. And this guardian angel gave you that impression? It started with a tape cassette, like the ones made by the benefactor. I listened to it closely, then went on the URL I was assigned, and that's when I received a text message containing one word. Braden paused and sighed for a moment. And what was the word? Scott urged her to continue. Lydia. She stopped again, but this time Scott didn't say anything. His look was enough to indicate his serious need for extra details. When I looked back at my computer screen, I realized what it was and understood what I needed to do. It was Lorraine Martin's code, and the key was Lydia. The code for the Deadpool? More of a to-do list designed especially for me. A list of missions that I was to carry. It said that I'd get the locations an hour before I was supposed to execute them. She finished. What were these missions about? And how do you know that this person can be trusted? Scott, the last time this happened, it turned out a banshee was behind it all. I didn't want to wait around for people to die for me to move. A banshee, she said. The Alpha could recall the vision that Lydia had in the bus, the one that they weren't so sure they could trust. Nothing was set in stone, but the pieces seemed to fit. His thoughts were promptly interrupted by his mother's voice, who was heading towards the both of them as they were standing in the middle of a hospital hallway. Everyone is being taken care of. You sure you don't need anything? It's all right, Mom. I am fully healed, but I'm worried about the others. I've never encountered those creatures before. I don't think their injuries are as usual ones. It's taking them longer to heal. And then there's Stiles and Lydia. Melissa put a hand on her son's shoulder to provide some comfort. She could read distress claiming his face. As she opened her mouth to utter some alleviating words to him, the double door at the end of the corridor shot open, giving way to Parrish, who barged in carrying an unconscious young woman in his arms. Some help? Please? He stopped running along once she disappeared behind the operating room's doors. She was left in the caring hands of Mrs. McCall. Scott and Braden joined him for a much-needed and influent conversation. A banshee? The werewolf asked. Yeah, she reached out to me earlier tonight. She asked me to find her. So that's why you were late. I believe you were supposed to find her a few hours sooner, commented Brayden. What's with that, by the way? She said something about me not being supposed to be where I was. My mission was to back you up at the scene of the attack against Scott. I believe she made direct contact with you since you're both connected, but somehow we missed the memo, explained Brayden. In the car. The radio, muttered Parrish to himself. Scott chimed in and attempted to align the bits and pieces in their proper order. So this banshee uses the code for the Deadpool, just like Meredith did. But instead of a kill list, she makes a task list for Brayden. She contacts Lydia in order to warn us about something terrible coming our way. She gives away a start line. Then she tries to contact Parrish to find her since he's the harbinger of death that's actually present in town. He misses the first sign, and that's how he doesn't find her in the right time, and she doesn't get to tell him about us and the attack. Do I have everything right? Usually Stiles does the casework and analysis of things. No, it's fine. That was spot on, actually. Brayden comforted him. Parrish's gaze dropped to the floor as soon as Scott finished speaking. He stood still and allowed his demeanor to describe his state of mind, as more doubt crept in on his soul, imbuing his lungs with guilt. He couldn't help but think things would have been a lot worse if Brayden didn't save the day. Things could have been a lot better if he held himself together. He'd rather feel the pain of claws digging through his chest any time, if it meant getting rid of that intoxicating culpability. The two others didn't seem to notice. They were more focused on the next step in the program since Brayden announced it. Speaking of start lines, Scott, you and I have somewhere to go in a few hours. Where? He asked. You said that the banshee contacted you through Lydia, and she gave you a place to start from? Right, that house where the Dread Doctors kept the chimeras in that basement, Scott concluded. Yes, part of my task is to accompany you there. It has to be just the two of us? He wondered. Yeah, I have a feeling it has to be that way. I'm not 100% sure. The list doesn't insist on the two of us being the only ones. What if it had to be just them? On the other hand, what if it hadn't? It was not exactly a matter of damned if you do and damned if you don't, but it was definitely a matter of life or death. Going alone could turn out to be fatal to them. Bringing someone alone could be fatal to that person instead. Scott despised the position of uncertainty he was in. Not sure anyone else would envy him for that spot, to be frank. His thoughts were not rudely interrupted when his phone buzzed. The Alpha picked up immediately after seeing the caller ID. Deaton? Sorry, I didn't get the chance to call and inform you that we were already back in Beacon Hills. I was hoping to catch you before you arrived, but why is that? Something happened? Asked Scott. You can say that, Deaton declared as he looked over at Theo. Still unconscious but seemingly stable, the vet then continued. I just wanted to warn you about something to keep an eye out for. An unidentified and apparently dangerous creature running around Beacon Hills. I'm not sure, but I think we had a front row seat to their show at our arrival. You were attacked? Worried Deaton. Mason, Corey, and Peter looked around at him, shocked by those words. Yes, we are at the hospital right now, and it looks like everyone will be fine. I hope. I see. We'll be heading your way. Theo has been injured, and I need to examine other victims for more information about the creature. Scott put his phone back in his pocket after ending the conversation with Deaton. His former boss had just informed him that he'd dealt with a monster that attacked them. He had to wonder if it happened simultaneously, in which case there were more of them. He did get a chance to see that there were multiple assailants, therefore it wasn't a far-fetched possibility. What about the Dread Doctors? How were they linked to all that? What was he going to find in that house? And the Guardian Angel? What of it? Was it a banshee? Or was it deeper and more intricate than that? His thoughts leaned towards Stiles as his face popped in his mind. He'd have been really helpful at that moment. More so helpful than himself, the werewolf thought. He stood right outside his best friend's room door. His feet had walked him there while his head was doing all the thinking. Chapter 14. No answer. Hey, Fisher, where do we set it up? She looked up at the deputy that had just spoken to her, then at his hand. It was pointing towards a man that stood at about 2 feet behind him. He seemed to be carrying a package in his arms. What do we need to set up? She asked back. It's a printer. She just shut her eyes and slightly shook her head for a brief moment, finally remembering about that damn machine. She had to endure her partner's complaints about it for the entire duration of the past 2 weeks. Yeah, it goes near Parrish's desk, she said as she referred to the desk next to hers with her index. The man walked by and put the box where he was pointed. He's not here at the moment, so I'll sign for him. She picked up a pen in her right hand and extended her left arm towards the delivery man, who handed her a clipboard for the signature. As her eyes landed back on the open files in front of her, the same young deputy spoke once more, grabbing her attention yet again. I've been meaning to ask you this, but never really had the opportunity to. Well, now is your chance. Have at it. She cracked a friendly smile as she waited for the question to come. You've been his partner for a while now, and how is it really? You mean working with a hellhound? The look on his face was a good enough response for her. I don't mind you asking, you know. It's not really a taboo subject. Kind of feels like it, though. Haven't ever since the all-out war 3 years ago. It's like reality shifted. To be fair, it's not just an impression. Reality did sort of shift, said Fisher with a smile. She then proceeded to answer his initial question. But to answer your question, it's pretty much ordinary. Rarely anything supernatural. I don't think he's ever shifted in front of me. I figured. I don't know what I was imagining. He looked to his feet as he uttered those words, an air of embarrassment visible on his face. Well, we do end up finding more dead bodies than other dispatches. He seemed half amused, half surprised by her words. They both silently smiled at each other for a short number of seconds before another voice seized hold of their attention. The dispatcher's voice got suddenly louder than the rest at the sheriff's station. Dispatch, come in, dispatch. Jones. He kept shouting those same words over and over in hopes of hearing words at the other end of the line, but in response, all he got was the sound of static. Fisher slowly pushed her chair with her legs as she got up. Her interest in that conversation piqued, but she wasn't the only one to do so. Her colleague, as well as every living soul under that roof, stopped whatever they were doing and looked up. The dispatcher repeated himself a few more times. Eyes were wide open. He tried to keep his composure, but the cold sweat on his face and the twitch on his forehead gave him away. There was still no response. It seemed one of the dispatches had run into serious problems. They could no longer communicate with their colleagues. Fisher came close and asked for details. Gordon, what is the situation? Well, it's been since Sanders. We lost contact. Where are they? Multiple reports of bizarre sightings. They went to check. he said. Bizarre sightings. Where? She pressed. Reports of weird-looking creatures heading in the direction of Icon. Icon House? I thought it was deserted. And why would they go without backup? Gordon didn't say anything, but the deputy standing near, the one Fisher was talking to, started to think out loud. If the reports were about the same creatures from the attacks earlier tonight, then they are in serious trouble. The young woman stood still for a moment. She didn't move a muscle, focused on her thoughts. She didn't want to waste any amount of energy unnecessarily and disturb her brain processing everything. They're gonna need backup. More than one dispatch. The sheriff is off the hospital and Parrish is off duty right now. So, want to partner up? She asked the deputy standing nearby. Sure, we shouldn't go alone though. Wilson and Gibbs, they're not on patrol right now. And so, the two police cars set off towards Icon House, wary but completely unknowing what awaits them there. Chapter 15. Visionary. The inhumane robotic voice pervaded the space once again. That same dull, white, empty space surrounded Lydia as she stood still, bare feet, in a hospital gown. She was back to the vast nothing land she saw in her first dream at the beginning of the night. Another dream, she thought. Technically a dream. Lydia immediately swirled around her heels to finally meet the eyes of the speaker. Malia? Both banshees were facing each other, both wearing identical hospital gowns. I'm guessing the hellhound found you? Lydia asked again, though this time she got her answer. He did. I'm safe. For now. We're not wearing those god-awful dresses anymore. I suppose we both are at the hospital? Malia raised her left eyebrow and pulled a side smirk, a natural reaction to Lydia's reasoning. You pick up quite fast. That's nice to see. When I was your age, my thoughts were all over the place. My age? What is that supposed to mean? Muttered Lydia loud enough for Malia to hear. At that moment, she found that statement about the banshee's age more suspect than any other strange happening around them. You'll understand that soon enough. And what should I understand now? Interjected Lydia. Now? You need to look around yourself. What do you see? The strawberry blonde woman did as advised, but round and round everywhere she laid eyes, nothing was there to be seen. What am I looking for exactly? Because honestly, I can't see the point of this exercise, if there is one in the first place. Patience, Lydia. It will come to you, but you need to be calm. Even in desperate moments, even when everyone around has fallen to their knees, you need to stand and focus. Her words were true. Lydia was getting impatient, growing restless, losing control over her breathing. She was indeed wasting her energy away on what wasn't needed, although, upon hearing Malia's words, she didn't doubt their truth. She admitted to herself that she was faltering, and there was no time for that. Don't think about it too much. Just let your arms rest each on their respective sides. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and stay calm. Lydia was following Malia's guidelines as she was uttering them. By the time she finished speaking, Lydia was already in a calmer state. She remained that way for what felt like a minute. Her eyes then opened wide when she felt a light breeze across her face and through her hair. You felt it, didn't you? Malia asked with a smile on her face. The young woman facing her just nodded her head, ever so slightly in response. She wasn't sure what it was, nor did she understand why it was a good thing, but she didn't get any time to ask or even think about it. Her mouth ajar, her eyebrows pushed more and more together as she gradually frowned at the sight. "What is it? What do you see?" Lydia closed and opened her mouth, and when no words came out, Malia simply followed the woman's gaze towards her own shoulder. A black widow seemed to have climbed on Malia's back and decided to repose on her left shoulder. Though she saw it crawling about near her face, she remained unfazed and serene, as if it was supposed to happen. What is happening? Nothing that shouldn't happen, asserted Malia as she looked back at Lydia. She then brought her stare down to the ground. Lydia's eyes followed. "What?" She gasped in, but not only surprise. She began to hyperventilate when she saw an army of black widows just crawling past her. "Stay calm. You're safe. Focus on your breathing." And safe she was, at least from the spiders which were ignoring her. In fact, it seemed as though they had a purpose. They were all heading towards one and only direction. They were crawling towards... Wait, what? Relax, it's just a transition. Maylee's voice could be heard again. The transition she meant was that of space. They were no longer standing in the middle of nowhere, they were in a basement, a notorious basement amongst the pack. Lydia recognized it almost immediately by the giant gash in one of the walls. It was the Dread Doctor's one. The number of spiders grew exponentially as their numbers covered the entirety of the floor. All appeared to converge towards one random spot in the cellar. The young woman was attempting to determine the importance of said spot. What could be so special about it? When, and out of the blue, a loud cracking sound ensued from a wall nearby. Lydia's attention then shifted to the walls that kept cracking up from every side, so much so that the place began to tremble. At some point, the fissuring infected the ground as well. Part of that perplexed Lydia, however. All the breakings and cracklings met in a center on a specific spot, different from that of the spiders. Parts of the wall were blown away with a loud bang as water burst through them. Soon enough, water was spilling from every split and fracture. More bits of the basement exploded for more liquid to penetrate the chamber. Even though the pressure was high, the water moved in an unnatural way. Despite all the commotion, it was clear a third center was forming, only this time it was for the aqua. What the hell is all of this? Glimpses of the past? Well, can I freak out now? You're not up yet, so I'd say it's not over yet. It certainly wasn't over. As soon as Malia stopped talking, a third voice blasted through. It was another woman. "You're just like me, Lydia. Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it." The first words she spoke sounded like they were coming from a human being. The last ones of her sentence, however, were demonically distorted and reverberated so loud that it got too painful for Lydia to listen to without covering her ears and shutting her eyes tight. All of a sudden, everything went dead quiet. All she could see when she opened her eyes again was a boring white ceiling and a boring old hospital light. She was lying down on a bed, alone, wearing a hospital gown. She'd finally woken out of that vision. Lydia slowly got up to her feet and walked out of the room. The hallway was calm and empty, though she could still hear voices conversing softly. "Lydia?" She turned around to see a confused Scott standing a few feet behind her. "We need to talk to her as soon as possible." "Who do you mean?" Scott didn't get the hang of who she meant immediately until he deciphered her facial expression. The one she usually gives when she means, "You know exactly what I'm talking about." Oh, her. This way. How did you even know she was here anyway? She didn't say anything. She just followed him to the door he guided her to. When he opened it, the two friends took a moment and stood perfectly still. What they saw wasn't shocking or horrifying. It was just unexpected. Malia was already awake, sitting up. She seemed to be waiting for their arrival. When she saw them, she drew a short breath and spoke up. There you are. I was worried you'd make me wait. Chapter 16. The Awoken Hound. 3 loud enough but still gentle knocks came to Chris Sargent's ears. The door creaked a few inches open to let young Deputy Parrish peek through. Can I come in? He asked. Sure. Parrish did so. He then carefully closed the door behind him and slowly advanced inside the room. He dragged a chair near the bed and proceeded to sit. In silence for a short moment. I don't really know where to begin. I just thought I should talk to someone about it, he stated when he felt Chris's gaze weighing on him. What about? Although Parrish shifted his attention towards the woman lying on the bed. Is this the woman you found at the scene? Yeah, but she was still alive, unlike the rest of the people out there. She said her son was taken. They were all human? That we know. What we don't know is what did it. The deputy frowned and thought back to the conversation he had with Brayton and Scott. There is a possibility the same creatures that attacked Scott did this as well. That remains a possibility for now, unless you know or feel something that we, the rest of us, can't know. Speaking of knowing and feeling things, that last suggestion from Arjun seemed like a good segue to the subject Parrish was really meaning to talk about. I don't know. I haven't really used that side of me that much before tonight, he confessed. When you found the banshee? Parrish replied to Chris's question with a simple nod. How did you trigger it? Arjun asked again. I thought about Lydia. Every time I had a vision, she was there. Makes sense. Hellhounds and banshees are connected. I already know that. I just seem to struggle more to trigger my harbinger of death side compared to Lydia, for example. You both hold the title of harbinger of death, sure, but you are both inherently different. Chris marked a short pause before continuing. Lydia's only ability is to access the supernatural, which manifests through her hearing being tuned to a different level of that from others, and it runs in the family. Like it was for Lorraine Martin? Yeah, they just access what cannot be heard or seen by regular people, which is why they are not supernatural, unlike werewolves, kitsunes, or wendigos, who can't go through or touch mountain ash. Banshees can. According to what Scott and the others told him, he, as a hellhound, also had the ability to go through mountain ash barriers. The main difference, however, was that he burned through them, unlike Lydia, who just passed through without any noticeable interaction. One thing boggled his mind, though. Argent said that Lydia had only one ability. He said that Lydia had only one ability? I mean, I know she can predict death, but what about her ability to scream or have visions or into dreams? Now I was getting to that part. Her visions come from the things she hears, from the voices that speak to her, to warn her. And the power of her scream doesn't really come from her. It comes from every dying scream she can hear. Is that why her scream was so powerful back at Icon, when Valak drilled a hole in her head? Exactly. She could access and hear every dying scream, and it was just unbearable. Chris had finished explaining the origins of Lydia's powers. Jordan just sat there, looking attentive, and marveled at how awful it must be for her to hear and feel the pain of so many people when he himself struggled to handle his own. He snapped back out of his thoughts when Argent added, "Your power, on the other hand, doesn't really come from you. It comes from a spirit that inhabited your body at the moment of your death. A spirit that works for Odin's hunt. Its primary task is to protect the supernatural from whatever you're instructed. So I take orders from the wild hunt." Think about it. You didn't use your powers against the nogitsuné or against Kate Argent and her berserkers. Your powers only activated when your car was set on fire by your colleague. But you took the chimeras and fought the beast. What do you think is the difference? I was sent to fight the beast because the only other person who could stop him was a banshee, but even then, she needed to know his true identity. Yes, nobody else was strong enough, not even an alpha. That's why we had to freeze you almost to death. We needed to put you in contact with the spirit to get you on the same page. It's much easier to gain control upon its powers when you know each other, or so to speak. So while Lydia accesses the supernatural through herself, I have to jump through a few hoops to get there. Parrish finally concluded. Putting words in their places the way Argent did felt like finally sipping water after wandering for days under the sun in a dry desert, which may sound like an exaggeration to anyone other than Parrish, but then again, nobody else was walking in his shoes. That conversation cleared the fog in his mind. It shut down some of the voices standing in his way. He stood up, thanked Chris for his helping hand, and left the hospital. Once comfortable in his car seat, he gripped the steering wheel with both hands and stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. If there could ever be a moment for him to pitch in and actually make a difference, beyond vaguely patrolling around the town, if there could ever be a moment for that, then there was his shot. His breathing grew increasingly faster and louder as he hoped against all hope to make some kind of connection, sense an energy or catch a sound, a voice, contact. He desperately needed and tried to make contact with the spirit of the hellhound without losing control over his own body to it. Alas, when nothing came of it, Parrish just sighed and reopened his eyes to face the cold, hard reality, and he froze. A shiver ran down his spine when it dawned on him that the colors of the atmosphere around him had changed. He was no longer alone in the car. He could see someone from the corner of his eye, someone stiffly sitting beside him in the passenger seat, someone wearing a deputy's uniform. Parrish so very slowly and shakily turned towards the sight. The moment he laid eyes on it, he lost every bit of determination he'd mustered to wish for a vision as a way to contribute to the fight somehow. It was not an it, but a he. His colleague Wilson sat beside him, as pale as dead. His gaping eyes were surrounded by huge black circle bags, in a way that would seem excessive even for a panda. The most horrific thing about his look was the thin line dressed across his throat, clear for a strangulation mark. Right underneath that mark, another one lied. Only this time it didn't appear as a thin line, but a large one. It was a gushing wound with blood oozing from it. His throat had been slit open. Jordan's eyes were directly facing Wilson, so he'd stopped moving his head, though he couldn't quit the shiver, since the nightmare wasn't yet over. Once again, from the corner of his eyes, he'd capture another disturbing image, this time on the back seat of the car. Deputy Gibbs's physical state wasn't any better from Wilson's. Identical dead stare, crusty, cracking pale skin, and More importantly, the same slit throat and strangulation mark. What bothered Parrish the most about them was the lack of life emanating from them, almost as if those bodies were just carcasses drained of their souls. The deafening silence of the moment didn't ease Jordan's anxiety, but he kept still in anticipation. Then, as if on cue, both bodies cracked their mouths open in a grotesquely fast movement. But no ordinary voices came of them. No words, only radio static, which kept getting increasingly louder with time running by until he heard it. The echoey voice uttering those words. Icon. To Icon. Icon House. He listened to it play on repeat, getting further and more echoey by each second that passed, till the loop was finally broken. The silence, the natural colors of the night, and the temperature went back up to normal. Parrish stopped shivering when he opened his eyes to see his reflection staring back at him in the rearview mirror. His irises were glowing a fiery orange. He was sitting in the same position right before the vision, clutching the steering wheel with both hands. He immediately knew what he had to do. He started the car and booked it towards Icon House.